So far we've got as far as the Buddha having left home. So the Buddha's gone forth, and Jyotirana introduced us to that story and actually took it all the way to its consummation at the point of awakening. So it's really good to hear that story again. But I'm going to backtrack a little bit on that, and I'm going to talk about what happens next. So the Buddha's left home. Depending on which version of the story you believe, he's left his wife and child, or he's just simply left his parents. There's no mention of a wife or child or any magical shenanigans in the Aryapariyetina Sutta. He basically says, I'm off. And they go, no. And he says, I'm off. And he goes. So it's all very sort of undramatic. So he's left the palace and he's swapped his fine robes, his princely garb, for the rags of a passing mendicant, and he's on his own. And what happens next? So this is where I cue my sound effects, because I'm going to do this slightly different. So Siddhartha stands at the edge of a trackless, tangled forest. The foul-smelling rags he's wearing are itchy against his skin. The euphoria and excitement that he felt when he first shaved off his hair and beard and gave his fine robes to a passing beggar has dissipated. For the first time in his life, he is alone. For the first time in his life, he is afraid, very, very afraid. Ahead of him, a narrow path leads into the forest, away from his old life. He knows he must follow it. So, taking a deep breath, he plunges into the dense undergrowth. The path meanders. It threatens to disappear at times. His feet, more used to the feel of smooth marble, start to hurt on the rough ground with its roots, dust, stones, and coarse grass. He is hypervigilant, his body straining at the edge of rational control, ready to bolt. Something cracks with a sharp report ahead of him, and he thinks he can hear the rustling and sly padding of a large beast keeping pace with him somewhere out of sight. The forest is full of unknown noises, but it keeps its secrets and nothing appears. His sense of aching solitude deepens as the light fades. His sense of aching solitude deepens as the light fades. The path becomes increasingly hard to make out in the gathering gloom. But somehow he keeps going. Somehow he keeps his fear in check. Time passes. He doesn't know how many hours. He is hungry, weary, and footsore. But at last he spots the flickering of torches far ahead, and he knows with profound relief that he has arrived at his destination. He cautiously approaches the compound, ringed with flaming torches in the night. He sees small groups of people dressed in white, some moving mindfully around the compound, others just sitting quietly by themselves or in pairs. There is the low hum of conversation, punctuated by silence. Eventually, he emerges into the torchlight, keenly aware of how odd he must look. A fine young man, glowing with health, clad in stinking robes, stinking rags. He edges up to one of the white-clad men and asks to be taken to Alara Kalama. The man smiles. Yes, of course, he says. He politely extends an arm in the direction of a low, whitewashed building ringed with more torches and follows Siddhartha as he moves towards the door. Inside the building, dimly lit by more flickering torches, profound stillness reigns. People are sitting in meditation, clearly deeply absorbed, with upright postures and radiant faces. He passes by them and approaches a man with the long hair and beard of a sage, who is sitting on a raised seat at the far end of the room. Alara Kalama may be in his 40s, it's hard to say, and he's slightly built but somehow imposing. He welcomes the young man with a smile that lights up his whole face. giving it somehow a timeless look. What are you looking for? He says. Siddhartha tells him how he has gone forth from his former life and is looking for a way to put an end to suffering of birth and death. Alara's smile shades into knowingness as he says, I think we can help you there. Sit down. And so he teaches the young man how to meditate. Siddhartha is an apt pupil, his mind pliant and willing. He forgets about being hungry and tired, and his mind soon starts to soar up to the very limits of describable experience. He stays with Alara for many months, drinking in all he has to teach. States of bliss become commonplace, but they are temporary. Whenever he emerges from the meditation, from the depths of meditation, he finds that he is still wrestling with the same existential dilemma, still alone, still subject to sickness, old age, and death. Grateful as he is, he realizes that he can't stay, that he hasn't found what he's looking for. He goes to see Alara. Look, Alara says, you have an exceptional gift and have gone as far as a human mind can go. You are my equal now. Stay with me and let's lead this community together. Siddhartha hesitates. It's so comfortable and easy in the compound, far removed from the world with everything he needs on hand. He could become famous as a meditation teacher, have his own following. Why not stay? No, he says. I'm sorry, but this isn't the answer. This isn't the way to the deathless state. I have to go. If you must, Alara says. But this is as good as it gets, my friend. Still, you have my blessing. Grateful and a little sad, Siddhartha sets off once again into the trackless forest, this time with another destination in mind. He has heard from some of Alara's devotees that there is another famous meditation teacher whose attainments are even more extraordinary. We're happy here, they tell him, but he may have the answers you're looking for. So here he is, alone again, vulnerable and fearful. But he eventually finds his way to another torchlit compound with the same collection of peaceful and contented-looking white-clad meditators. The man he has come to meet, Uddaka Ramaputta, is older, perhaps in his 60s, with a magnificently gnarled face, penetrating eyes, and a ready smile. He repeats his request to Uddaka, who invites him to stay. He learns meditation from Uddaka and very quickly finds himself coursing at the very edge of the mundane, in a place where the very idea of perception, a perceiver, and something to be perceived ceases to make sense. Even more profound is the bliss, the sense of stillness that arises. And yet, when he comes out of meditation, he is still alone, still wrestling with the same issues, still driven by a fierce desire to escape from the pain of sickness, old age, and death. And he's also gradually been able to put his finger on something that has been bothering him about the people around him. They're very pleasant, very tranquil, apparently very happy. But there's something self-satisfied and complacent about them. Whatever they have experienced doesn't feel like freedom to him. Again, he has no choice but to leave. You have exceeded even my attainments, Uddaka tells him, and I don't want to lose you. I'm getting old. I'll step down, and you can take my place as the leader of this community. Again, thoughts of security and status flash through Siddhartha's mind. But he already knows the answer he must give. No, he says, I'm sorry, but this just isn't the way to the deathless. And so he takes his leave of the kindly old sage and his followers and just wanders on with no clear idea of where he is going or what he is going to do next. So we'll pick up Siddhartha's progress again next week. We'll see what he does next. But I wanted to spend some time looking at the story and its deeper significance. It might seem surprising that Siddhartha failed to find what he was looking for, even in the deepest and most subtle of meditative states. After all, meditation is what Buddhism is about, isn't it? If it wasn't good enough for Siddhartha, well, why do we do it? I think the answer to this lies in the wheel of life. So most of you will be very familiar with this image, which would you mind going and getting the wheel of life, Karen or Maggie? Get all my props together. Thank you very much. I'll just, so that just sort of prop it up so that it can be seen. You could show it to the people on Zoom. So this is a familiar image. And at the hub of the wheel, you've got the three poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion, which drive our actions. And then the next string is made up of two segments. So there's a white segment, a sort of semicircle, with figures rising up kind of happily and gladly, sort of as if they were ascending to the skies. And the black half has unhappy looking people tumbling down towards them, nasty looking hells beneath them. So the principle here is that skillful action of body, speech, and mind leads to happiness, whereas unskillful actions of body, speech, and mind inevitably lead to suffering. Like the rest of the wheel, this is an endless round. Happiness followed by suffering, followed by happiness, followed by suffering, no state enduring, all states transitory. And the largest of the largest of the rings depicts the 6 realms of existence on the wheel, which some schools say are real places in which you can actually be born, in real lives. But we might choose to look at them more in terms of psychological states. So you have the 3 lower realms, you have the hells, the hungry ghosts, and the animal realms. And these reflect states of intense neurotic craving, the hungry ghosts, the unbearable suffering of mental and emotional breakdown, which is the hell realms, and the state of being in which the only goal really is to indulge our desires for food, sex, and sleep, which is the animal realm. But the 3 higher realms are the realms of the Titans or jealous gods, which is characterized by intense competitiveness and rivalry and jealousy, and the ruthless pursuit of our own advantage. Then there's the human realm, which is characterized by a rough balance, you could say, between suffering and happiness. And finally, there's the Deva realm, right at the top, the God realm, a place where suffering is absent, where only pleasure is experienced, where the incredibly long-lived Devas forget that there was ever any suffering and sink down into the complacency of uninterrupted pleasure. And I think this is the key realm in this story. Perhaps it could be that Alora Kalama, I'm not sure I pronounced his name correctly, but there you go, and Uddaka Ramaputta had shown their followers a way to the Devaloka, to the temporary alleviation of suffering, with the emphasis, as Siddhartha found, on the temporary. And here's a quote from Thanissaro Bhikkhu that I found when I was actually looking for something else, but I think it's very relevant to this. The path contains 2 important turns. The first comes when all passion and aversion for sensual pleasures and pains has been abandoned, and your only remaining attachment is to the pleasure of concentration. The difficulty here is that you've come to rely so strongly on the solidity of your concentration that you'd rather not look for its drawbacks. At the same time, the inconstancy of a concentrated mind is much more subtle than that of sensual experiences. But once you've overcome your unwillingness to look for that inconstancy, the day is sure to come when you detect it, and then the mind can be inclined to the deathless. So the point is that even at the very limits the most refined limits of human experience, attachment can still be there. You can still settle down into an experience of self, even if that experience is much more subtle than it is in our normal states of consciousness. You can forget that such sublime states are impermanent, that they won't ultimately rescue you from suffering because of their dependent nature. And for all of the subtle and refined pleasure that it offers, the God realm is still on the wheel of life. It's still part of conditioned reality, of conditioned existence. And this means that from the Buddha's point of view, it is dukkha, it is suffering. And that's what Siddhartha recognized with the practices taught by Alara Kalama and Uddaka Ramaputta. That while they offered a blissful and subtle experiences, those experiences were impermanent, and as such, didn't offer a final answer to the issue of dukkha. So what's missing? I didn't give you all of Thanissaro's quote. So in response to the tendency to get attached to the pleasure of concentration in meditation, he says, at this point, you turn and examine the pleasure of concentration in terms of the same three characteristics, dukkha, impermanence, and not self, that you used to contemplate sensual experiences. In other words, you bring wisdom to bear on the matter. And that's the crucial difference. It seems to me that Alara Kalama's and Uddaka Ramaputta's approach ignored the wisdom aspect. It didn't apply the first noble truth, which is the truth of dukkha. And the only way off the wheel of life, with all its endless rounds of suffering, is to know this truth, is to know the first noble truth, is to recognize dukkha as dukkha, and to see that it cannot be solved on its own level. It can be solved by escaping temporarily into more subtle forms of attachment through meditation, or by surrounding ourselves with nice people and nice things. In short, by arranging samsara in a vain attempt only to experience pleasure and to banish suffering. So most of us probably don't experience this problem at the very elevated level of meditation that Siddhartha had access to. I don't think I've ever experienced the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. But we probably all do know the tendency that we have to settle down, to try to keep things nice, to try to rearrange the deck chairs, as it were. We may well have a perfectly decent meditation practice, good Sangha friends, and all manner of supportive conditions. And those things are to be celebrated as they are important. But unless we keep reflecting on our experience, seeing more and more deeply into the truth of dukkha, impermanence, and not self, we will run the risk of settling down, of falling into the trap of what Trungpa Rinpoche calls spiritual materialism, whereby we mistake the temporary alleviation of suffering for the real thing, and think that we can sort suffering out once and for all by just rearranging our conditions. But as the Bodhicitta Puja, which is a favorite of mine, has it, nirvana is the giving up of all. And it is nirvana my heart yearns for. So we need to relinquish. We need to relinquish our views, our reactive habits, that illusion that there is a real permanent self in here that's calling the shots and somehow needs to be protected. This is what our system of practice calls spiritual death. And of course, in the end, we will have to relinquish our bodies and minds when we die physically. So this sounds scary. And I've been reflecting recently that it is scary. I guess I'm quite attached to being embodied in this particular way, in this world with this me. But we shouldn't despair, because spiritual death is the prelude to spiritual rebirth. It doesn't all just disappear into the void, and what an unfortunate word that is. What the Buddha promises us is boundless wisdom, boundless compassion, and boundless bliss. If we can just let go of what keeps us small and separate. So I'm going to suggest 3 things for us to talk about, on the basis of what I've said. The first of these is very much to celebrate the good conditions that we have and the progress that we have made. So I'm not for a moment suggesting that our conditions and practices aren't important. So yeah, celebrating what it is, how far we have come, what progress we have made in the Dharma life. But the second thing I would suggest we look at is to look at our motivation, and where we might perhaps acknowledge with kindness where we do tend to settle down, to rearrange the conditions of samsara to try and keep dukkha at bay that way. And thirdly, what might it look like for us to let go? Have we already had some sense of the freedom that can come when we do? When we relinquish a view or a habit, when we see a flash of truth that we haven't seen before?